The phone call came on October 15th, 3 days after I'd started seeing Dr. Williams for what I thought might be depression but was turning out to be something more complex. I was standing in my kitchen, looking at the stack of therapy worksheets she'd given me about recognizing manipulation patterns and setting healthy boundaries. "Rachel, I'm calling about Thanksgiving," Mom announced, bypassing any pleasantries. "We're doing it at your place again this year." I stared at the worksheet titled Family Systems and Scapegoating, while Mom continued talking. "Same as always. The whole family, traditional dinner, all the fixings. I already told everyone it's at your house. Cousin David's bringing his new girlfriend and her kids, and Aunt Martha's son is coming with his family from Phoenix. Probably around 40 people this year." 40 people. That wasn't a family dinner. That was a catering operation disguised as a holiday gathering. "Mom, we haven't discussed Thanksgiving plans yet." "Well, we're discussing them now. Your house is perfect for hosting and you're so good at organizing these things. Remember how beautifully everything went last year? Everyone still talks about that cranberry sauce recipe you found last year when I'd spent 3 days cooking, 2 weeks planning, and $800 of my own money on groceries. When I'd been so exhausted by dinner time that I barely ate anything myself. When relatives complimented the food while I washed dishes alone in the kitchen, missing the football game and family conversations happening in my own living room. Have you considered rotating the hosting duties? Or maybe using the community center? Don't be silly. Nobody else has the space or the skills you have. Besides, I already bought the turkey, a 25-pounder. I'll drop it off next week along with my grocery list for the sides." Her grocery list. For my kitchen. Using my labor. The decision had been made without consulting me, and my consent was assumed rather than requested. After she hung up, I returned to the therapy worksheets scattered across my counter. One exercise asked me to identify situations where I felt my boundaries were being violated. This Thanksgiving conversation would definitely qualify for the list I was supposed to compile. That evening, I called my sister Jenny to gauge whether I was overreacting. "Did you know Mom assigned me to host Thanksgiving again?" "Oh yeah, she mentioned that. 40 people this year, right? That's going to be intense. Good thing you're so organized. Did she ask you to co-host? Or offer to rotate?" "Me? God no. My apartment barely fits 8 people and you know I'm terrible at cooking. Besides, you're so much better at this stuff than any of us." "Better at what exactly? Cooking? Cleaning? Spending my own money on other people's meals?" There was a pause. "Rachel, are you okay? You sound kind of bitter about something that's always been your thing." Bitter. That was the word everyone used when women stopped accepting unreasonable demands gracefully. Your thing, as if I'd consciously chosen to become the family's unpaid caterer. I'm just questioning whether hosting 40 people is really my thing, or if it's something that got assigned to me. "But you volunteer for these hosting duties. Mom said you've always loved doing Thanksgiving." After I hung up, I felt more confused than before. Had I volunteered? Or had I simply failed to object loudly enough when volunteering was assumed on my behalf? At my next therapy session, I brought up the Thanksgiving situation with Dr. Williams. "How do you feel about the prospect of hosting 40 people for dinner?" she asked. Overwhelmed. Resentful. Trapped in a role I never consciously accepted. "What would happen if you called your mother and said you couldn't host this year?" "I can't do that. She already told everyone it's at my house. People are making travel plans." "But what would actually happen if you made that call?" I thought carefully about it. There would be significant drama. People would call me selfish and unreliable. The family would have to scramble to find another solution. And what would happen to you personally? I'd feel guilty. Everyone would be disappointed in me. What else might happen? I'd be free, I said quietly, surprising myself with the admission. I'd have my Thanksgiving back. Dr. Williams nodded thoughtfully. What does your ideal Thanksgiving look like when it belongs to you? I'd never been asked that question before. What did I actually want to do on Thanksgiving if I wasn't responsible for orchestrating everyone else's experience? I think I'd like to spend it quietly. Maybe cook something I actually want to eat instead of managing multiple dishes I won't have time to enjoy. Watch movies I've been meaning to see. Read that book that's been sitting on my nightstand. Just rest. That sounds genuinely lovely. What's preventing you from having that kind of Thanksgiving? 40 relatives who expect me to serve them dinner without questioning whether I want to serve them dinner. Who made you responsible for managing their expectations? That question haunted me for weeks afterward. Who had made me responsible for everyone else's expectations and assumptions? When had I agreed to be the family's designated holiday coordinator? The answer was gradually, then suddenly. It had started innocuously with compliments about my cooking and comments about how welcoming my house felt. It had evolved through a series of small concessions and unexamined assumptions into a role that now felt impossible to challenge without seeming ungrateful or selfish. Over the next few weeks, relatives began calling to discuss Thanksgiving logistics. They talked about what time they'd arrive, what dishes they hoped I'd prepare, dietary restrictions I needed to accommodate, seating arrangements they preferred. Uncle Bob called to request his favorite stuffing recipe, the one that required 3 different types of bread and took 6 hours to prepare properly. Cousin Sarah asked if I could make 2 different types of pie because her kids were going through a picky eating phase. Aunt Linda wanted to know if I could set up a dedicated kids' table with activities and special meals to keep the little ones occupied throughout the afternoon. Each conversation added new items to my mental to-do list. Each request assumed my compliance without offering assistance or asking about my preferences. Meanwhile, I was learning things in therapy that reframed my entire understanding of family dynamics. Dr. Williams introduced me to concepts like emotional labor, family scapegoating, and people-pleasing as survival strategy. She helped me understand that healthy families rotate responsibilities and don't systematically exploit one member's willingness to serve others. You've become the family's designated caretaker, she explained during one session. But you never formally accepted that role through conscious choice. It was assigned to you based on your inability to say no, not your desire to say yes. How do I change that pattern? By changing your behavior, which forces everyone else to adapt their expectations. But you need to be prepared for resistance. 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, Dr. Williams suggested I might benefit from additional support beyond our individual sessions. She referred me to a support group for people dealing with family boundary issues that met weekly at the community center. I was surprised by how many people struggled with similar family dynamics. There was Mark, who'd been managing his elderly parents' finances for 10 years while his siblings claimed they were too busy to help. Lisa, who planned every family vacation because she was supposedly good with details, meaning she was willing to do research and coordination work that others found tedious. David, who hosted every holiday gathering because his house was the largest, regardless of his own preferences or financial capacity. All of us had become default solutions to family problems we hadn't created, responsible for maintaining systems that primarily benefited everyone except ourselves. The thing about being helpful, the group facilitator explained, is that helpful people rarely ask for help themselves. Families learn to rely on members who don't make demands or express their own needs loudly. How do you break out of that pattern? I asked. You stop participating in it. You change your own behavior, which forces everyone else to either adapt or reveal their true priorities. But what if they don't adapt? What if they just get angry and accusatory? Then you learn something valuable about whether they value you as a complete person or just as a service provider. 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, Mom called with additional menu requirements that had emerged from family conversations I hadn't been part of. I was thinking you could do 2 turkeys this year, she said matter-of-factly. 40 people is really pushing the limits for one bird, and we want to make sure there's plenty of food. 2 turkeys would mean 2 days of intensive preparation instead of 1, plus additional oven space coordination challenges. Also, Jenny mentioned that her new boyfriend is vegetarian, so maybe add a substantial vegetarian main dish. Nothing too exotic though. You know how conservative Uncle Bob gets about unfamiliar foods. More complexity. More dietary accommodation. More menu planning and shopping. And Cousin Sarah called to ask if you could make individual desserts instead of whole pies. Apparently, her kids are going through a phase where they won't eat anything that's been cut by someone else. I was taking detailed notes while she talked, writing down requirements that seemed to multiply exponentially with each conversation. When I looked at my completed list, it represented approximately 40 hours of work spread over 4 days, not counting shopping time or advance preparation. This is becoming quite extensive, Mom. I know it's a lot of work, honey, but you always pull everything off so beautifully. Everyone looks forward to your Thanksgiving dinners all year long. It's become a real family tradition. A tradition that existed entirely because of my unpaid labor, but that had somehow become framed as my personal passion rather than my family obligation. After she hung up, I stared at my planning list and realized something profound. I was orchestrating a dinner I didn't want to attend, filled with food I wouldn't have time to enjoy, for people who would leave me to manage cleanup alone afterward. That week at support group, I shared my Thanksgiving dilemma with the other members. What would actually happen if you just didn't do it? Mark asked directly. They'd all show up at my house expecting dinner to be ready. And then what would happen? There wouldn't be any dinner prepared. And then they'd be upset and confused. They'd have to figure out alternative arrangements. Would anyone actually starve to death? I thought about it carefully. No. They're all adults with their own kitchens and resources. So the worst-case scenario is that 40 adults would have to take responsibility for feeding themselves on Thanksgiving? When he framed it that way, it didn't sound like a catastrophe. It sounded like normal adult responsibility that had been artificially transferred to me through a series of unexamined assumptions. The facilitator leaned forward. What do you think would happen to your family relationships if you stopped being their problem solver? They might realize they're more capable than they pretend to be. Or they might realize they've been taking advantage of me. What's the worst thing that could happen? They could reject me for not being useful anymore. And if they did that, what would you learn about those relationships? That they were based on exploitation rather than genuine affection. The week before Thanksgiving, I made a decision that felt both terrifying and liberating. I went grocery shopping like I always did. But this time I bought ingredients for a meal designed for one person. A small Cornish hen instead of turkeys. A single sweet potato. Ingredients for one serving of stuffing and one small portion of green bean casserole. I also registered for the special Thanksgiving session our support group was hosting, Surviving Family Holidays. A workshop specifically designed for people struggling with boundary issues during holiday seasons. Tuesday before Thanksgiving, relatives started calling with their expected arrival times and final requests. We'll be there around noon, Uncle Bob announced confidently. I'm hoping to catch some of the football pregame coverage before dinner gets started. See you at 1 o'clock sharp, Cousin Sarah texted. The kids are so excited for your famous mac and cheese. Can't wait for Thursday, Jenny called to say enthusiastically. I'm bringing my new boyfriend. Fair warning, he's a big guy who eats quite a lot. Wednesday evening, I methodically put my modest grocery purchases away in my refrigerator. One small hen. One sweet potato. Ingredients for single-serving side dishes that I would actually have time to enjoy eating. Then I sat down and wrote a letter that I planned to tape to my front door Thursday morning. Dear family, after much reflection, I've realized that I never actually agreed to host Thanksgiving this year. That decision was made for me, not by me, without consulting my preferences or capacity. I understand this creates an inconvenience, but I hope you can work together to find a solution that doesn't rely on one person's unpaid labor. I'm spending today focusing on my own mental health and learning about healthy family boundaries. I hope you all find a way to have a wonderful Thanksgiving together. Love, Rachel. Thursday morning, I woke up naturally without an alarm for the first time in weeks. Number 5 a.m. turkey prep schedule. No frantic house cleaning. No last-minute grocery store runs for forgotten ingredients. I made coffee slowly and deliberately, sitting in my kitchen looking out the window at the quiet morning street. The silence felt peaceful rather than empty. At 9:30 a.m., I taped the letter securely to my front door and drove to the community center for the Surviving Family Holidays workshop. The session turned out to be exactly what I needed. 15 people sharing strategies for maintaining emotional equilibrium during family dysfunction periods. We discussed guilt, obligation, manipulation tactics, and the crucial difference between being genuinely helpful and being systematically exploited. How many of you are feeling guilty about setting boundaries today? The workshop facilitator asked. All 15 hands went up immediately. How many of you also feel relief about not being responsible for managing other people's emotions today? All 15 hands remained up. That contradiction, guilt and relief existing simultaneously, is completely normal when you're breaking dysfunctional family patterns. At 11 a.m., my phone started ringing insistently. I'd turned off all notifications but could see calls lighting up the screen. Uncle Bob. Jenny. Cousin Sarah. Aunt Linda. I turned the phone off completely and focused on the workshop discussion. We spent the next hour practicing phrases for setting boundaries with family members without being cruel or unnecessarily confrontational. I'm not available for that responsibility. That arrangement doesn't work for me. I need you to make alternative plans. I won't be participating in that dynamic anymore. At 1 p.m., during what would normally be my most frantic dinner preparation period, I was learning about the psychological concept of differentiation. The ability to maintain your own identity and preferences within family systems that pressure you to conform. At 3 p.m., when 40 relatives would typically be arriving at my house expecting a fully prepared feast, I was participating in a group discussion about why women are disproportionately expected to manage family emotional labor and social coordination. At 6 p.m., when I would usually be serving dinner that I'd barely had time to taste myself, I was driving home feeling lighter and more centered than I had felt in years. When I arrived home, I found 17 voicemail messages, 43 text messages, and several relatives' cars still parked in front of my house, though the occupants had apparently given up and left. I listened to the messages while preparing my quiet Thanksgiving dinner for one. The responses followed a predictable emotional progression. First confusion, then anger, then panic, then guilt-tripping, finally resignation. Rachel, there's a note on your door but it doesn't make any sense. Call me back immediately. This is incredibly selfish and irresponsible. 40 people were counting on you. We're all standing in your driveway with nowhere to go. Where are you? How could you do this to the family? Especially to Mom? We had to scramble to find restaurants open on Thanksgiving. Do you know how difficult and expensive that is? Uncle Bob is having chest pains from the stress. I hope whatever point you were trying to make was worth causing this chaos. The final message was from my sister Jenny, her voice a mixture of hurt and bewilderment. I don't understand what's happening with you lately, but this was really extreme. Everyone's talking about how embarrassing today was. I hope whatever you're going through was worth humiliating the entire family. I listened to all the messages while savoring my perfectly prepared Thanksgiving dinner for one. A beautifully roasted Cornish hen with crispy skin. Honey-glazed sweet potato with just the right amount of cinnamon. Small batch of sage stuffing that was seasoned exactly to my preferences. It was the most delicious Thanksgiving meal I'd ever eaten, partly because I was actually hungry enough to enjoy it, and partly because every bite represented a choice I had made for myself. That evening, after I'd enjoyed my meal and cleaned up my modest mess, I sent a carefully crafted group text to the family. I understand that today created confusion and inconvenience, and I sincerely apologize for any stress that caused. However, I'm not sorry for prioritizing my own mental health and well-being. Going forward, I'd like our family gatherings to be planned collaboratively, with responsibilities shared among multiple people rather than assigned to one person by default. I'm absolutely open to hosting smaller gatherings that I actually agree to host and that fit within my capacity. The responses to my message varied dramatically. Some relatives sent angry, accusatory replies questioning my mental stability and family loyalty. Others responded with confusion but apparent willingness to try understanding my perspective. A few surprised me with unexpected support. My cousin Mark texted privately, "I've been watching you burn yourself out for the family for years. I'm glad you finally decided to put yourself first. It was overdue." Aunt Linda called the next day to offer an apology. "I never really thought about how much work those dinners were for you. I guess I assumed you enjoyed doing all that cooking and organizing. I'm sorry we took your efforts for granted." Even my mom, after several days of cooling off and processing, eventually admitted that the family had gotten too comfortable taking my labor for granted. "We ended up finding a restaurant that could accommodate most of us," she said during a phone call the following week. "It was actually quite nice not having to worry about cooking and cleanup logistics. Maybe we should have explored that option years ago instead of assuming you'd always handle everything." The following week at support group, I shared what had happened and how I was processing the aftermath. "How do you feel about your decision now?" the facilitator asked. "Relieved. Free. Still dealing with some guilt, but mostly proud of myself for finally choosing my own well-being." "What did you learn from the experience?" "That the sky doesn't actually fall when I say no to unreasonable demands. That my family is more capable of solving their own problems than I thought. And that I was enabling their learned helplessness by always swooping in to fix everything." "What surprised you most?" How quickly some people were able to adapt once they realized they had to. And how much energy I have available for my own life when I'm not constantly managing other people's needs. 6 months later, family dynamics had shifted in ways I hadn't expected. Holiday hosting began rotating between different relatives' homes. When I did volunteer to host gatherings, they were smaller, more manageable events where other people contributed meaningfully to planning and execution. The biggest change was that family members started asking instead of assuming. Would you be interested in hosting Easter for about 12 people? Instead of Easter dinner is at your house. Could you help with some of the planning if we host Christmas? Instead of you're in charge of coordinating Christmas. And I started saying no sometimes. Not out of spite or revenge, but out of genuine self-preservation and respect for my own limits. Last Thanksgiving, I volunteered to host 14 people. A number I could manage comfortably without sacrificing my own holiday experience. Other relatives organized their own smaller gatherings rather than expecting one person to handle the entire extended family. Instead of one person bearing the complete burden, the holiday became a shared responsibility distributed among multiple households. The meal was smaller but infinitely more enjoyable. I actually sat down and ate with everyone instead of constantly shuttling between kitchen and dining room. People helped with cleanup without being asked or reminded. Conversations lasted longer because I wasn't exhausted from days of preparation. This feels more like an actual family gathering and less like a catered event, Jenny observed while helping me clear dishes. It's actually much better this way. The support group taught me that boundaries aren't walls designed to keep people out. They're doors with locks that I control. I can choose when to open them, for whom and under what circumstances. Family members who respect my boundaries get access to my time and energy. Those who don't learn to make other arrangements. Now when relatives need help with events or family coordination, they ask respectfully and offer to share both the work and the associated costs. The expectation that I'll automatically sacrifice my own plans for everyone else's convenience has been replaced with genuine consideration for my preferences and capacity. And every Thanksgiving since, I remember the year I chose myself instead of choosing to serve others at my own expense. It was the most important gift I ever gave myself. And ultimately the most valuable gift I gave my family too. Because I taught them that love isn't measured by how much you're willing to sacrifice, but by how much you're willing to respect each other's autonomy and individual worth.